Good evening, everyone. I'm actually going to change something so you guys can see us first and foremost. Welcome. I feel like I've been away for like 3 weeks, and I know it's only been 1 week.
It's only been 1 week. It's only been 1 week.
I know, right? That's how much I missed y'all. I miss being with you all. So welcome to another edition of Policy Pulse, the education edition. We are so happy to be with you all this evening. We are here live every Thursday, 6 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. And we invite each and every one of you to join us as we discuss from an objective perspective happenings in education as it relates directly to policy. And tonight we are tackling one of the most significant education policy shifts in recent history, the dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education. Mm-hmm. The Trump administration has taken unprecedented steps to shrink, restructure, and ultimately attempt to eliminate the department. But we have to discuss what does this actually mean for schools, students, and families. So over the next hour, we're going to introduce ourselves. We are going to break down what has happened, who it affects, and what comes next. All right. So I just wanted to make sure you all are clear on what is happening this evening. I'm going to make this a little bigger so you all can see us, see the slides, all the things. Last week, I missed you all, but we were here and we were discussing the upcoming election. The first Tuesday in April, we will have a special election here in the KC metro area. For those that are in Kansas City proper, we'll be definitely devoting some time to approve or not the general obligation bond that is being put forward by the Kansas City Public Schools. Cecilia had a guest on last week, Monica Nance, and they dug into that general obligation bond and so much more. So if you were not here live, feel free to go back and take a look at that particular Policy Pulse edition. You will not regret it. It is extremely important because you will be voting in the election. Hopefully, prayerfully, get out to vote.
Absolutely.
If I sound a little congested and stuffy, I am. Happy spring. Spring has sprung, but with it has come some bipolar weather. And I thought I was going to miss it, but it got me. It got me. Now, Cecilia will say that, the weather does not make you sick. Germs do.
I believe it's not climate, it's germs. It's not cold, it's germs. Science 101. We're science teachers. We know better.
Cecilia, go ahead and introduce yourself to the people. Tell them who you are.
Okay. Hey, everyone. My name is Cecilia Nanya Belzer-Patton, and I am the founder and cultural curator of Just Systems. Just Systems meets at the intersection of education, political education, policy, strategy, and systems change. And so I am here as a veteran educator that is very much invested in our children, their families, and making sure that we do our due diligence around education, educational policy, and making sure that students, families, and we as community stakeholders have voices as well. So as Katina said, we did speak last week with Monica Nance, who is our sorority sister for Phi Delta Kappa, which is an educational sorority for African-American women. And we spoke really in length around the bond issue and things that are moving forward. Monica is an ambassador for the Kansas City Public Schools and really was able to share with us in a way that was clear and hopefully move people's hearts and minds to do what we need to do for our students.
Awesome. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. For those of you that don't know me, I don't know that I did a formal introduction, but again, my name is Katina Taylor. I'm the founder and CEO of Dreams KC, an education nonprofit social enterprise where we empower parents with the tools they need to teach their children foundational literacy skills. I have been in education for 25 years now. I can't believe it every time I say that. I spent 15 of those years inside the four walls of classrooms, starting with middle school, going to first grade, and ultimately um, high school. So I have been around the block, so they say, in traditional
Been
public
around the
schools.
world and I
I
can't
can't
stop
my
talking.
uh, but in any case, I've spent time in the traditional public schools, charter schools, as well as the private school sector. So I have been all over. And I absolutely love working in the field of education. So we want to welcome you all again. And we want to let's share with you all, our disclaimer, as we always do. Understand and know that the views and opinions expressed are those of the individuals. They are Cecilia and Katina, and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization, business, or entity that we may be affiliated with. This is extremely important because we do a lot of work with a lot of different organizations and our own. And we want you all to know that while we are in the field of education, we work within the ecosystem, that when we come to you around policy, we are not representing those organizations. We are two individuals that are passionate and steeped in this work. And we want you all to be empowered to take action, to advocate for yourselves. Most importantly, we want you to be informed. We want you to have less fear and anxiety as it relates to education policy. And we want to give you real news, not fake news. Cecilia, you want to add anything to that?
What Katina's trying to say, you all, I'll say it in layman's terms and in street terms, as the kids would say. We are very clear about our intention to remain objective here, to be as journalists, and that means to be curious, to try to share a story without having an agenda. And so, if we have an agenda, it is for to ensure that our students, our families, and our communities are informed, that they are knowledgeable, and they are in front of actions that can be taken to either positively or adversely harm or endorse our community. So we are here to be the conduit for the information, not to do so with an agenda.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Keeping it real in street terms. As we
No
dive
cap,
in,
as the kids say. No cap. No cap.
right? That's it. No cap, no cap. All right. So, Cecilia, you want to introduce tonight's topic?
Yes, I do. You all, for the first time in modern history, in our lifetime, we have an administrator, a chief administrator of the United States, who has signed endorsements to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. The U.S. Department of Education, you all, is the chief officer and entity for K through 12 education across the country. It is the um, bearer of and the standard bearer of how we should and should not move forward when it comes to education of our children. It is the benchmark for programs that we know have resourced our communities, our schools, our children, things such as special education. And if you're thinking, my student doesn't require special needs, I would ask you to think again. Oftentimes, when we think about special education, we only think of one end of special education, which tends to be students who have barriers or students who um, have need for a different type of education. We forget that special education also includes the gifted and talented spectrum. Special education includes ways in which we provide our students that have different abilities, resources, so ramps within our schools, in conjunction with the American Disabilities Act. Department of Education makes sure that happens. Standardized testing, making sure that there is a standard that is set for all of our students, not just some of our students. And so we, again, for the first time in modern history, have a chief administrator under the Trump administration who has signed executive orders to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. What does that mean? That means that states would be responsible for all of the standards for their state, for the children in their states, K through 12. If we think that this is okay, we want to provide information so that you can make good decisions, good choices around whether you think that this is best for the children of the state of Missouri and the children across the country. We know ourselves that we are a very complex, diverse um, country, right? We have different regions. People talk differently. While we all speak English, we speak different types of English. We have different accents. We have different needs. We have different strengths. We have different, I don't want to say flaws, but things that we need to be resourced around regionally. And to think that every state would be able to handle these things, we just want to explore that. We want to explore how that might affect our children.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cecilia.
Mm-hmm.
So, as Cecilia has said, you all, well, first, let me just say this. So let me get some housekeeping out of the way. Please like and share
Please.
our broadcast each and every week. Invite others to join us as we discuss these significant and important policy changes, actions that are being taken in the education space, but that can directly impact you, your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, your cousins, your siblings, the children in your community. So the only way that we are informed and can take action is if in fact we have the information. So join us each and every week right here, 6 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time, to discuss policy in education. So Cecilia said it. We're breaking down the major changes happening in the U.S. Department of Ed under the Trump administration. We'll explore workforce reductions, policy shifts, and long-term impacts, all which could change the landscape of K-12 education across the country. And our goal here is to cut through the noise, present the facts, and help you understand how these decisions impact students, teachers, and families. So that's it. It's policy analysis, it's educational impact, and it's future outlook. That's what we do here each and every week as it relates to specific things that are happening in the space. All right. So I want you all to understand and know that that's exactly what we're doing. So we want to talk about the very specific events that have occurred as late as today.
That's
Something
today.
happened in the space, right?
Yes.
So over the last few weeks, several things have happened. March 11th, the Department of Education announced a workforce reduction of nearly 50%. Just sit right there, 50%. So 1,315 employees were laid off, and these employees will be on administrative leave from March 21st to June 9th. So administrative leave, that means they are getting paid, but they are at home. Okay, they have been furloughed. All right, understand and know what that means. Then today, March 20th, President Trump signed an executive order directing the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and to transfer the authority to the states. So, the long term goal, as we have already said, the administration has made it clear that they want to work with Congress to completely eliminate, dismantle, demolish, rid. What other adjective can I use? What other synonym can I use, right?
Ex-
Eliminate,
exercise out, excavate,
exercise out, excavate. I got you.
dismantle, uh,
Destroy.
destroy. Why
Yeah.
I find this very interesting too, Katina, is that remember that President Trump has had a previous term, um, 2016 to 2020, in which he had the Department of Education, in which he um, appointed Betsy DeVos, who is not an educator, to be over that entity And now you're saying that the things that she brought forth, the things that were needed at that time, are no longer needed, which I find to be very interesting. So let
You
us dig
know,
in.
Cecilia, one of the things that I thought about today is in the previous term. So he had a full term, he was not reelected. We had another administration in its place, his
Hmm.
place, of course, and now he's back. Well, what that has allowed not only him to do, but his
Hmm.
advisors,
Hmm.
those authors of Project 2025,
Hmm.
etc., is it gave them an opportunity to think about what they wanted to accomplish in his previous term and
Sure.
strategically plan in real ways how they could make that happen, a reality in this
Hmm.
term. And I don't necessarily know that people are sitting with that, thinking about that. And so when they say things are happening fast, they're happening overnight, this guy isn't playing with the agenda that he has set forth, they had years to plan.
Hmm. At
It
least
has,
5.
yes, at least. But this, we know this is long game, right?
Absolutely.
And so I
Absolutely.
just like to always point out is that anytime you see strategic moves like this being made, no one woke up on January 21st or whatever day he got sworn in and said, "This is what I want to do." He had an agenda, he ran on that platform, and
Yes.
he had a lot of individuals that were supporting his run, his bid for office to assist in strategically creating a plan to make it a reality, right? And so I just think people need to understand and know kind of where we are with some things, all right? So that being said, I'm going to go to the next slide. We're going to talk about these strategic moves to weaken the Department of Ed, and we have several here. So you want to dive in a little bit, Cecilia, on these?
So, as Katina already shared, there's been nearly, I've seen two different. Some people say 50%, 52%. Some people say 48%, but we know it's roughly 50% of the Department of Education has been put on executive leave. They are being paid and they're not being allowed to work through the beginning of June. We know that there's been a freeze in hiring, there's been a freeze in funding. So if you're not understanding how that affects our students in our communities, oftentimes districts like Kansas City Public Schools, like Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools, they get federal funding. They get federal funding based upon their need, based upon things that the U.S. Department of Education would like for districts that have underserved and undervalued, often students, what they would like to be focused on. They have programs that move through. All of these things have been muted until June. If we are wondering then what happens, we don't know. We are in this space of not knowing how things are going to be moving forward,
Yeah,
how this is going to be affecting our children and their families.
absolutely. And so let's talk even more. So remember that we told you all previously that Congress must approve the full elimination of the department.
Hmm.
However, the administration is taking very strategic steps to weaken the department.
Yes.
Essentially, excuse me, making it inoperable, ineffective, inefficient, unable, right, to implement programs and or oversee policies that they have traditionally overseen. I don't know, right? Oversaw. And making sure that states were in compliance with federal law. Mass layoffs significantly reduced the department's ability, again, to oversee those education policies and programs. So we have to be clear that no one's minding the house, so to speak, right? If people aren't there. And of course, the executive orders directly impact this
Mm-hmm.
potential preparation for closure by shifting the functions, cutting the programs, etc. Influence is minimized, right? Where states could be influenced to do the right thing, right? Monitored to ensure they're doing the right thing. Like we have a system of government that has checks and balances for a reason. So no one branch of the government uh, operates with more power than the
Than
other,
the other.
right? Gets out of hand, creates a dictatorship.
And
Go
I
ahead.
think that people need to think about, if you were, let's put this in brass tack terms. If we were operating under an entity as Cecilia and Katina,
Yes.
and we were used to getting funding from Mr. Brown down the street.
Yes.
And Mr. Brown down the street, his organization and his way in which he had been moving forward were suddenly diminished. If half of Mr. Brown's workforce was either let go or put on administrative leave, and therefore Cecilia and Katina were not able to get the funding for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months that we
Yeah.
were used to in order to be able to function, what decisions might we, Cecilia and Katina, make in June or July around how we are used to being able to move forward? And
Yeah.
so it's a tactic, it's a strategy, it is a move to really push entities to go along with whatever the administration might seem or deem fit, as opposed to perhaps making the best decisions for its students and their families.
I love that, Cecilia. I love the way you kind of just broke it down and made it make sense at a local individual level, right? Make it make sense in layman's terms, so to speak. One of the things I want to point out is 20 states have filed suit against the administration. And those include Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin. You did
I'm
not hear
sure.
me
I'm sure that
say.
the administration is surprised by some, like Arizona,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
a
So
traditionally Republican
that's what I
state.
was going to point out. That some of these are Republican states,
Hmm.
some are not. You do not see, however, our great state of Missouri, nor do you see our state just to the west of us, Kansas. Perhaps they'll join in later. I don't know. But currently, we have these states that have decided very matter of factly that they do not support the administration in dismantling the Department of Education. And as a matter of fact, even the general public, you know, we consistently have polls out. I don't know who they poll because they never ask me. Um, but they say 60% of the public currently does not support the dismantling of the Department of Education. So when you think about all of the midterm elections that are coming up, I'm wondering if now is not the time for the citizens of these United States who do not support it or support it to get in touch with their elected officials to let you all know where you stand, what you want them to do, and how you want them to move. Because remember, elected officials should
Should.
represent constituencies, not
Hmm.
a particular political party or a presidential administration, but the needs, wants, and desires of the majority of their constituents.
Hmm.
And we've gotten significantly away from that for sure, right?
It's
So
become very partisan, right? In order to
yes,
to try to be in good favor, as opposed to remembering that we aren't elected officials aren't only elected officials of people in their party, they're elected officials for every single person in the state, including students and their families.
yes, absolutely. So what's the immediate impact on K-12 schools, in particular, as it relates to uh, Department of Education Secretary McMahon's hiring, reduction in workforce, and the executive order that was signed just today, March 20th, 2025, the first day of spring, right? So, Cecilia, you wanna jump in?
Sure. One of the things we've already talked about how this is going to affect special education services and civil rights of students. We already see that coming down. There are some things that we spoke about briefly last week and the week before with the organization. What is that? Parents, PDE.
Yes,
Um, Parents, I don't remember what the D and E is, Katina.
I'll tell
Um,
you in a minute. Give me a second.
Parents Defending Education. That's what
There
it
we
is.
go. That's it.
Parents Defending Education, which is an organization that's not even based in the state of Missouri, you all. It's a national organization, and they are moving through the EEOC saying that Kansas City Public Schools are um, not utilizing due diligence in representing all children, in that they are asking with their 2030 plan that there be effective representation of teachers that are hired, educators that are hired, district level officials that are hired, that represent the students within the district. They're saying that that's discriminatory. So things like this that move through the U.S. Department of Education will be affected because of civil rights. Special education services. Remember, special education is not only for students who are considered in need, below average, different abilities. It's also students who are on the gifted and talented scale. It affects things that are extracurricular activities, often in schools like STEM and STEAM. That's not in all schools. It's
Yeah.
also going to affect Title I funding, you all. So Title I funding is a way for low income schools to be able to get extra funding, resource funding, additional resources because of the needs of those students and their families. And finally, it's going to be, as we just talked about, if the U.S. Department of Education is the benchmark for the standards of how we view and then implement education in our schools and in our states, there's going to be a huge lack of oversight without that entity being there. And so, if we think that that doesn't matter, um, I would like for us to think about critically
Yes.
the things that we see happening all the time around the ways in which we just know that everything is not fair, it's not just. And so, and how we oftentimes need a neutral um, entity such as the U.S. Department of Education to assist with that in spaces around our schools. I know it's not neutral was a wrong word, but I'm trying to be as objective as I can.
Objective as you can be.
Yes.
I got you. You know, the thing that I thought about when we start talking about federal protections for discrimination within schools, I think
Mhm.
about the young men and young women who have locks like me
Yep.
and have been discriminated against recently.
Yep.
I think about the policies and procedures that are in some schools um, surrounding the discrepancies within suspension rates. School students of color versus students that are not of color.
And just, I think, discipline in general, not even
Yeah,
suspension, but just discipline in general, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
one of the things that we know is that we often think, oh, when students, I just look in the Kansas City area, when students and their families move to suburban areas that have, where they have many of the same opportunities as their peers who are not of the same cultural or historical components that, or racial components that they are, we would think that that would shift discipline. we have data that shows that it does not,
Right.
even at
I'm
home.
also, yeah, I'm thinking also about funding as it relates to extracurricular activities.
Yes,
I'm thinking about the equitable distribution of resources as it relates to technology. I'm
yes.
thinking about the equitable distribution of resources and protections around who may or may not get up to date, high quality, academically rigorous curricula. I'm thinking about a lot of those things, access to resources that allow for safe school transportation services. I'm
Sure.
thinking about high quality lunches that will be healthy, trash in, trash out. So we need good food, right? So I'm just thinking about all of these different things when we talk about this oversight that will be lacking, the reduction in federal funding that will be lacking. Remember, we talked about funding before,
Sure.
and while federal funding accounts for a very small percentage, when you think about the actual dollar amount in billions that come from the federal government for schools, then where does that funding go? Does it shift to different departments? Does it go into, I don't know, some, general fund to be allocated differently? Like, those are questions that should be coming up for everyone that we need to navigate as we're talking about dismantling the U.S. Department of Education, right? So, long term, what does it mean, right? Um, Returning education to the states. Supporters argue that this gives states more flexibility, while critics warn it could increase inequities. You want to tackle
Think
what
about,
you're
yep,
thinking?
think about states like, and in case Missourians and Kansans think that we are so far away from states who are traditionally always on the bottom of effectiveness, equity, inclusion, impact, if we're going to use different language, like Mississippi. Mississippi always runs down at 50. Missouri and Kansas are never far behind, right? And we think it states that traditionally, historically, have had issues like Mississippi, who have not provided oversight around all students. When we think about equitable manners, when we think about, it was just in modern times when we had Brown versus the Board of Education and these types of things in schools. One of the things we might want to consider is that without an entity like the US Department of Education, the ills of society will then fall into the space of the state where people have power. Missouri is a trifecta state. If people don't know what that means every entity of the state legislature in Missouri, the governor, the House of Representatives, and the Missouri US Senate are Republican ruled. So if we think
Super
about
majority.
supermajority. If we think about that from a perspective of historical data, where do we think that the students of the Kansas City Public Schools will fall under how that is funded, how that is resourced, how that is viewed, how that is deemed what is needed and what is necessary for those types of different, districts? St. Louis Public Schools will be another one, would function well
Well,
or
and I think people need to also understand that it's not just Kansas City Public Schools, it's all students in urban centers across the
urban,
country. So,
across
like,
the
let's be clear. So, whether they're in a charter school, which is a public school, a traditional public school, um, I mean, if this proposes, it can bring about some significant challenges for all of those students, all of those teachers, all of those schools and or school districts, and even for the state itself. If the state does not have the infrastructure and the resources to maintain and serve special education students, to ensure fair funding across districts, things like that have been done at the federal level, then we are in trouble,
trouble.
significant trouble.
And I think
I will say
sometimes
that.
I will say that too. And I think oftentimes we think about this. from a perspective of the urban core, because we live in the urban core, I think one of the things that people ought to think about is that it's going to be on both sides of the state that are polarized. It's going to be urban core. It's also going to be rural kids too, right?
Rule,
That are
yes.
under that are under resourced often. That oftentimes are, I don't want to say behind the curve, but have just a different viewpoint around um, the ways in which we can have impactful education. And
Yeah.
so what are the ways in which this will have long-term effects? I think we should talk about that, Katina, when we
Yeah.
think about things like workforce development, when we
Yes.
think about whether our students will be 21st century ready, which is
Yeah.
the lingo that we talk with, that we speak from, whether
Yeah.
we think about, oftentimes it's our districts that ensure that our students have the technology in their home, like internet. I know most of us don't recognize that we have half of our students in urban core as well as in rural areas that don't have internet access in their home. And so it's our
Reliable, fast internet
internet,
access.
yes. And so it is our districts that help to make that happen. It is, you know, it's
And
just
our
so
libraries,
much.
which are also under attack.
Yes.
Just
It's
saying.
just so much to take into consideration around this.
And we also know that without federal guidelines, states will then set their own curriculum policies, which means that there is no standardization across districts, across states, across
And if we
schools.
absolutely, and if we think that this doesn't matter, you all, think about states that we've heard this around the news for the last several years, like Texas, who have approved to put in their textbooks that slavery was in fact immigration of Africans who wanted to come to the United States and participate in this democratic exercise. That's a
In,
rewriting of history.
yeah. In addition to that, you'll have some. You mentioned Mississippi earlier. One of the things we know is Mississippi is climbing, and they're
Yeah.
climbing fast, and they are outpacing many other states in the area of literacy, for sure. And so you'll have some states that will continue to adopt and implement very progressive reforms to be able to move students very quickly and close those gaps that have persisted for quite some time. But you'll have others that will stay married to the status quo and will fail to innovate in ways that move our children forward, and to your point, make them global citizens able to participate in a 21st century world that currently exists. That
And one
is a con when we think about moving things um, out of the Department of Ed and back to the states.
and while we don't want to, I'm trying to be as objective as I can be in this
I'm
space.
hoping you work on that now.
And while we don't want to assume that there's a one way that a supermajority or a trifecta thinks about when it comes to whether we want to globalize education or not, what we do know is that we have historical data that suggests that that may in fact be so. And so since we're in a state like Missouri that tends to not want to move forward in those types of ways, how then does that affect our students in their families?
Yeah. Well, and we just got to be clear. Those students and families that are in low income areas, whether they be urban or rural or suburban, because there are in suburban areas poor families. If you don't know, they may again receive fewer resources due to increased reliance on local property taxes. Right. That's generally the way in which education is funded. So that potentially widens the achievement gap for racial and socioeconomic groups, students with disabilities, low income students, minority students, fewer legal protections. We've already pointed that out.
Mm-hmm.
And the variability. When I did some research around the globe, and looked at countries that have moved students best, they have been nations where one, the value of the human capital was important. Not a select few, but all.
No.
Because they valued the humanity of their citizens and understood that everyone has a part to play in its ability to thrive.
So one of the ways in which Katina and I first developed commonality and a kinship around education is we both had seen a documentary about how Finland was able to move from one of the bottom spaces of education to the top in a very short amount of time. Now, we should admit that Finland as a country is about the size of Rhode Island. It's a small country. It's a country that does not have a lot of diversity of people. And yet, they were able, from what Katina just said, their commitment to ensuring that all of their students receive quality education, they made very clear choices around that over a decade that moved them from the bottom to the top in a very short amount of time.
Absolutely. They pay their teachers well. That's another thing that those countries do. And not just Finland.
Yep.
Um, they require that someone that desires to be a teacher has at least a master's degree.
Mhm.
Um, it's they shrank the number of schools within their communities to ensure that all their resources were used wisely, not so
Mhm.
they have 30, 40, 50 kids in a classroom, but certainly a manageable number. And they were getting the best they could get from their government, right, to ensure that they could compete in the 21st century world.
Absolutely.
Um,
Taking into
you know,
consideration how students learned, every individual, they individualized
yeah,
education in a way,
absolutely.
you
Which
know?
we know should be happening, and more often than not, it doesn't happen. So, yeah, so there are a lot of things that are happening in nations where the education system is thriving, not limping along, and that's why I struggle with this conversation, Cecilia. Um, and I've shared this with you before. It's the the education system that we had. Well, never mind, we're presenting information, so I'm going to remain objective
We can
as we go.
after we present the information, I do believe that we can ask people to consider some things, right?
Yeah, so here's some pros and cons of state educational authority should the U.S. Department of Education be dismantled. So I'll go over the benefits. Cecilia can go over the potential drawbacks. So, potential benefits: increased local control allows education to be tailored to community needs. Potential for reduced bureaucracy and faster decision making at the state level. The opportunity for states to develop innovative programs specific to their students, and more community involvement in education policy and development. So those are some potential benefits if they were to be implemented, right?
Yes.
So what are the cons here?
Increased disparities, right? You all. So when we talk about that, when people have talked about disparities in the past, when people have said that we can really look at zip codes, that was one of the things that really helped to shift health. It helped to shift ways in which we looked at housing, funding. What we know is the potential drawback, the potential con, the potential negative impact that this can have in our communities is that it will increase those disparities. It will increase resources being given to wealthier and poorer states. It will weaken enforcement of civil rights to protect vulnerable students. If we don't think that this is needed, you all, we did not have laws and legislation to protect children until the 1960s and 1970s. Are people aware of that? We did not have a U.S. Department of Education as an entity until until the President Jimmy Carter administration. So that was the mid 1970s. So when we think about these things, when we think about the lack of a uniformed educational system. I've been saying benchmarking. Educators understand that that is a standard where it's just a realm in which we just start. That everybody starts at a certain point so that we can track the data of how we're doing. Are we doing well? Where are the ways in which we need to pivot and adjust? We'll have a lack of that. We won't have that as consistently as we do now.
Yeah.
We also will risk having a way that is more challenging to coordinate and manage what is happening from state to state to state. So we know that regionally that we have states and regions across the country that help with education. Northeast is one, West is one. Historically, New York State and Northeast, Massachusetts, uh, that region of the country tends to be advanced educationally. California, Western areas tend to be advanced educationally. And we know that we have these types of regions that are, and then we have regions that tend to be not, Missouri included, Mississippi included, Southern regions included, then it may be more challenging to coordinate and manage between state and local education entities.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for real. So we got to pivot just a little bit and talk about where Congress sits, legal challenges. Remember, 2021 states have already sued the Trump administration
Mm-hmm.
as it relates to the actions taken around the Department of Ed. But remember, and I just always want to mind you, like we can get anxious, we get sad, we get frustrated, we get angry, right? uh, our stress levels increase when we don't know what may or may not happen. But
Absolutely.
understand and know that Congress must approve the complete elimination of the Department of Education. And right now, remember I pointed out midterm elections, 60% of the people across the country are not in favor of this. It looks unlikely that Congress is going to be willing to do that. Unlikely. I didn't say impossible.
Unlikely.
So understand. I don't want y'all to say, well, Katina, you said I said unlikely, not impossible.
Even with that though, Katina, it still would be diminished. It could be diminished even if Congress does not approve to move forward with that, right?
Yeah. If you can make it inoperable, then effectively what you have done is dismantled it, right? So we are clear about that. If you tie my hands and I can't do any work, I may be sitting at my desk, but I still can't do anything, right?
Yep.
So we know that, of course, 2021 states have sued the administration. We have states, we have advocacy groups collectively coming together to sue to stop the dismantling efforts. I got an email today from NEA asking the National Education Association, one of the largest, if not the largest, unions in education, said, hey, we have to put a stop to this. And this was, and one of the things I had the text of that email. I want to share some of that with you all. One of the things that teachers and parents also care about is like, again, when we talk about what's real, what's not. So this is what they said. Students in every community of our country, in rural, suburban, and urban areas, benefit from programs run by the Department of Education. Dismantling the department will, now they said this matter of factly, increase class sizes. Well, the Department of Education does put policies and procedures in place. I don't know that they directly talk about class sizes, but okay. Steal resources from our most vulnerable students. We've talked about that. Take away services for students with ADHD, dyslexia, and other disabilities. We know we will have a lack of oversight. I don't know that it will take away services.
But when we
Cut.
think about things though, Katina, like especially spaces like KCPS, center, school district, other school districts that have been trying to do restorative practices and trauma informed practices, that was heavily funded by federal funds. heavily funded.
Yeah.
And so these types of things, I didn't want to, but yes, go
No,
ahead. I
yeah,
didn't want to
you're
interrupt
fine.
you.
It says cut job training programs, make higher education more expensive and out of reach, and gut student civil rights protection. Some of those things I agree with, some of those I don't. But again, I don't want to ever put out messaging that increases fear unreasonably, right?
Yes.
Now, some colleges and universities have been like, you know what, we're going to get innovative in our thinking and policies that we put in place to ensure whether or not the Department of Ed survives or not, we are doing our part to ensure that all students have access to higher ed. For example, one of the things that Harvard did, since, DEI is under attack and things of that nature, said, look, that's fine. We're not going to focus on any type of race-based quotas or goals or admissions policies. We're going to look at economic situation of our students. So, students, if you make above $200,000, everything will stay the same. You'll pay your tuition, you'll apply for admittance, all the things. If you make between $100,000 and $200,000, we're going to offer an opportunity, should you be admitted to our institution, to have tuition free attendance. Then they said, if you make below $100,000, this is Harvard University that we're talking about, and you get admitted to our institution, don't worry, we got you. We're going to give you a scholarship for not only tuition, but room and board as well. Mm-hmm. That is innovation. That is strategically thinking outside the box, regardless of what an administration may or may not do. We can spend our time creating fear and angst and anxiety, or we can spend our time looking at the facts and then innovatively thinking what we can do to ensure we meet our intended outcomes, regardless of what happens at the national level.
So remember, you all, when I was just talking about how there are regions who have been exceptional in their commitment to education. Again, remember I said Massachusetts, Harvard's in Boston, in Massachusetts. We have in California, the UC Berkeley's, the University of California system in general, right? Which the whole, if people are unaware, the entire University of California system allows for any student that has graduated from high school in California to receive an associate's degree without cost. Mm-hmm. And then it has highly advanced schools like the University of California, Berkeley, that are research organizations that are committed to that education, those types of things. They tend to be in ways in which people would say more liberal in thought. They are willing to be open. What are the institutions that we have in Missouri that are like that? Exactly, crickets. And so I just don't know that we have any.
Yeah.
And so, yes, Harvard is doing great things. Harvard is thinking outside of the box.
And I would hope that other institutions would join in.
Will adopt that.
Same thing. Yeah. If they have the endowments, the donors, and things like that. Now, the question will be, will their donors continue to fund the endowment and give to the institution as they move forward in this direction? It'll just be interesting to see. So let's go ahead and we're at 55 minutes. We want to make sure we're wrapping up on time. So how do these executive orders and these changes potentially impact you? What can you do? So for parents and families, stay engaged, attend school board meetings, advocate for special education services, write your national representatives, let them know where you stand, what you want them to do, how you want them to vote. Show up.
The state and local ones, you all. They have pushed.
Yeah, I was going to say the state level. Yeah, and the local as well. Remember, we have an election coming up. For educators and school leaders, be aware of changes in funding and curriculum that could affect your schools, right? Um, for community and business leaders, get involved in education funding discussions to ensure the equitable distribution of resources. If you don't think, as a business owner, and I don't care how many employees you have, one or I don't know, 50,000, understand and know that a well educated workforce benefits you.
Absolutely.
Fewer accidents, higher attendance rates, more productivity, all of those things come from a well educated workforce, not just in the technical skills, but the soft skills as too, their executive functioning. That children get those things, hopefully, prayerfully, in the schools and school districts that the educational institutions that they attend. So I will say that that's how these things can affect you. These are things that you can do. Cecilia, close us out.
I just want us to recognize, I think one of the things that Katina said that I want to very much echo and amplify is that we don't want to be fear mongers. We don't want to be doomsday Debbies. What we do want to say is remember how much power that you have. Remember that our elected officials work for us, that we're their employer, including our president, right? And so it is time for us to get in front of these types of things and make our wishes and our voices known, whichever way you fall on this issue, right? And so, what are the ways in which, again, stay up to date, get involved, share information, strategize, come up with tactics, come up with plans? What are the ways in which we can do the things that we need to do for ourselves and for our students and in our communities? Remember that we don't only have to depend on our state, local, and national entities in order to educate ourselves. Remember that we used to do that in other ways, and
Yeah.
remember that we can once again.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, y'all. I'm not yawning because Cecilia's boring me or that this is a topic for.
I'm feeling well.
I am not feeling well at all. One of the things I also want to say is this: petitions are great. Send a petition out. Marches are great. Protests are great. Do those things too. But I think most importantly, you have to walk away from conversations like this, information like this, with a couple of things: understanding, having clarity and understanding around what is happening, that you will, in some shape, form, or fashion, be impacted, and that you have to, superintendents, school boards, union organizations, civic, small business, etc. You should be sitting around a table today
Mm-hmm.
planning for what may come. That is still time well spent if it doesn't come to pass.
Either
I
way,
do not, I don't want us to be reactionary. I want us to have a plan of response ready to go. We know what reaction looks like. COVID, right? What does response look like? Prevention, intervention, all woven into a strategic pattern. What does that look like? So I call upon our educational leaders, superstars, etc., to figure out what needs to happen at your school district, your state, your region. While all of this is being flushed out, be prepared.
in our community leaders, what are the ways in which we can reimagine education? And not only from a formal perspective, but from the ways in which we used to learn. We taught ourselves, you all. It is not so far removed that we taught ourselves how to read. We made sure that we knew how to count money, that we knew how to do all the things that we need to do. We learned about our own history. And so, what are the ways in which we can reimagine what education looks like and our stake in it, and ensuring that we're doing the things to make sure that our students get the best? And
Absolutely.
oftentimes, we are the ones that can provide them the best in our
That's right.
community.
I love it. I love it. I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in. If you catch this on the replay, drop hashtag replay in the comments so we can see that you're seeing it. Share this out. Encourage others to join us each and every week, Thursday, 6 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time, as we discuss education policy matters from an objective viewpoint. Tonight, we covered a major shift in federal education policy. And we understand and know that the Department of Education the future certainly remains uncertain. But one thing is clear, you will be impacted. Your school district, your children will be impacted.
Absolutely.
Not just in Kansas City, but nationwide. So stay informed, stay engaged, take action.
Get in front of it, y'all. Get in front of it. Get in front of it.
That's it. Education depends on active citizen participation.
Yeah.
So that's what we got. I made it through.
You did. I hope you feel better. Yeah, I want to say this, and I know that sometimes our friend Katina and champion of both of us, our U.S. Missouri Senator Barbara Washington, she'll whisper in my ear before I'm ready to speak. Don't preach. Just do the information. And I feel like I want to preach at this moment and just say our kids are worth our effort. Our students are worth our effort. Our families are worth our effort and our voice. And for those of us who can, make sure that we do the things that we need to do in order to ensure that the type of education that we did or we did not receive, that the ones that we say that, oh, I want this to be better, that we're utilizing our voices to make sure. If we're saying, oh, I had a really good one and I want that to continue, we're utilizing our voices and we're making sure that that is something that we're moving forward. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Well, we'll see you all next week, Thursday, 6 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time for another edition of Policy Pulse. And until next time, y'all, remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and take action. Peace out, y'all.